The reins creaked in Samuel's hands before he ever said a word, and I knew from the sound alone that something was coming. The wheels found the ruts they always found on the turn before the Hostetler place, and the cold came up through the floorboards and into my ankles, the way it always did in late October, and I pulled my shawl tighter, and I did not look at him. I had my bag at my feet. I always had my bag at my feet, wedged between my boots and the buggy wall, the leather gone soft and dark at the corners from 20 years of my hands. He looked straight ahead at the horse's ears, and he said, "Leave it under the seat today." I did not answer him right away. I had delivered 3 babies that week. I did not know yet that this one sentence, 6 words, said without heat, without even much feeling behind it, would be the sentence I measured every other sentence of my marriage against for the rest of my life. My name is Rachel, and this is Rachel the Amish Midwife. I served as a midwife in an Old Order settlement in Holmes County for close to 30 years, and in that time I was present for more of my community's beginnings and endings than any bishop, any doctor, any husband ever was. I was trusted with the most private rooms in every house I entered. And I have decided, now that I am out, now that I am past the age where anyone can call me a girl who ran off and didn't know better, to tell you what I actually witnessed at those bedsides, and beside those buggies, and inside those marriages, the parts the community never allowed any of us to say out loud. If that is the kind of story you came here for, I would ask you to subscribe, to hit the bell, to let me know you are here, because every one of you who does tells me that this still matters to somebody. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from tonight. I read every one. Now let me tell you what he meant by those 6 words, and what it cost me to understand them. In that world, a husband is the head of his household, the way the bishop is the head of the district, and the way God is the head of all things. In a chain nobody is permitted to question, each link answering only upward, never sideways, never to the person underneath. A wife's obedience is not something extra she offers her husband on top of her love for him. It is assumed to be the same thing as her love for him. A submissive wife is a peaceful home, the bishop said at nearly every wedding I ever sat through, and I sat through more of them than I could count, and I always noticed that no one ever said what a submissive husband made. On the way to church, a wife is expected to be arranged, not just seated, her hands folded, her voice absent unless spoken to, her whole self a kind of quiet advertisement of what her husband has built her into. A husband is permitted, under the Ordnung, as it was understood in our district, to correct anything about his wife's conduct that might reflect on the family in front of the brethren. And Church Sunday was the one morning of the week when that correcting mattered most, because Church Sunday was the one morning everybody was watching. What is never said, not once, not by the bishop, not by the aunts who trained us, is what a woman is supposed to do with the parts of herself a husband decides do not belong in the buggy that morning. It was the fall of 1994, and I had been married to Samuel for 6 years, and I had been a midwife, trained under old Rebecca Yoder, and already trusted to attend births on my own for almost 4 of them. We were 19 minutes from the miller's place, where church would be held that week, on a road I had ridden 100 times, and I still remember that the sky was the flat gray of a day that could not decide whether it wanted to rain. My bag sat between my feet the way it always did on a church Sunday, because a midwife's bag goes where the midwife goes, in case a woman's time comes early, in case a child decides that a Sunday morning in a stranger's yard is exactly when it intends to arrive. I had never once been asked to leave it home, until that morning. "Leave it under the seat today," he said, and when I finally looked at him, he was still watching the horse's ears, not me, the way he did when he had already decided something and did not want to see my face while he said it. I asked him why. He said the deacon's wife had mentioned, at a quilting the week before, that it did not sit right with some of the older women, a midwife's bag riding into the yard on a church Sunday, like she expected to be called away from worship itself, like her work mattered more than the meeting. He said it reflected on him, not on me, on him. I remember the specific weight of that word, reflected, the way it made me into a surface instead of a person, something his standing simply bounced off of for the district to see. I want to tell you about Verna Schrock here, because you cannot understand what happened to me without understanding what had already happened to her. Verna was older than me by almost 15 years, married to a man named Levi, who ran the sawmill 2 farms over, and Verna had been, before her marriage, the settlement's best quilter, invited every winter to teach the younger girls. In her 2nd year of marriage, Levi decided that quilting frames took up too much of the front room, and that a wife's hands were better used elsewhere, and so the frame came down, and it was never put back up. I delivered Verna's 4th child in 1991, a boy, in the same front room where the frame used to stand, and while she labored, she told me, between contractions, in a voice so flat it frightened me more than any scream would have, that she sometimes forgot she used to be able to make anything at all. I did not understand, sitting there with my hands on her belly, that I was looking at my own future with a different man's name attached to it. I would learn later that this was called something. I did not have the word for it yet. I only had Verna's face, and the frame that was never put back up, and the particular silence of a woman who has stopped expecting anyone to ask what she wants. If any part of Verna's story is landing on you the way it landed on me, take a moment now and hit that subscribe button, because stories like hers are the ones this platform tries hardest to bury, and every single one of you who stays tells me I am right to keep digging them up. I left the bag under the seat that first Sunday. I want to be honest with you about that, because I promised myself when I started telling these stories that I would not make myself the brave one before I had earned it. I folded my hands the way I was supposed to. I sat through the 3-hour service listening for the specific creak of a woman shifting in her seat that meant her back was starting to ache in a particular rhythm, the rhythm that meant hours, not weeks, and I heard nothing, and I told myself that was proof he had been right, that the bag had never been needed, that I had made a mountain out of 6 words spoken without heat. I did not yet understand that the absence of an emergency was not the same thing as the absence of a cost. There is a part of this story I cannot tell you here, not on this platform, not under these rules. The algorithm has limits, and I have learned exactly where they are, so I wrote the rest down instead. Slowly, without the softening, without the cuts. Everything the camera is not permitted to show. The book is called The Births They Never Recorded. 46 pages of what I actually witnessed at those bedsides. No softening, no cuts. The link is in the first comment of this video. That is where the part I could not say out loud lives. The second time it happened was in the spring, 8 months later, and by then it was not a request anymore. Beth Troyer, a young wife I had delivered myself when I was still an apprentice to Rebecca, was in her 9th month and had told me privately, the week before, that something felt different to her, lower and tighter than it had with her first. A woman's own sense of her body is the first instrument any midwife learns to trust, before the scale, before her own 2 hands. I told Samuel I needed the bag that Sunday, that Beth Troyer's time was close and unpredictable, and he said, "You will not carry that bag into the yard again." And this time there was no explaining the deacon's wife. No quilting circle reasoning offered at all. There was only the sentence, and the reins, and the horse's ears. I said nothing. I sat with my hands folded. I said nothing. That Sunday, in the middle of the second hymn, Beth Troyer's mother slipped out of the singing to find me, and I had to walk the 1.5 miles back to my own house on foot, in my church dress, to get the bag Samuel had made me leave behind. And by the time I returned to the Troyer farm, Beth had been laboring alone in a back bedroom for the better part of an hour, with only her mother's hands and her mother's prayers, and the baby, a girl, was born breathing, but barely, and blue enough around the mouth that I have never in 30 years forgotten the exact shade of it. I do not tell you that story to say Samuel nearly killed a child. He did not intend that. Men rarely intend the specific thing that happens. They only intend the general shape of control, and the specific things happen underneath it, out of their sight, the way weather happens underneath a decision made in a much calmer room. But I want you to understand the moment of rupture in my own marriage was not loud. There was no shouting in our kitchen that night. Samuel asked how the Troyer birth had gone, and I told him the baby had needed help breathing, and had gotten it 11 minutes later than she should have, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "The Lord provided," and went back to his paper. And something in me that had been holding on, some very small and very stubborn thing, simply let go. Not with a sound. It was not cruelty in his voice when he said it. It was certainty. It was the absolute conviction, so total it did not require volume, that a wife's usefulness in the yard mattered less than a wife's stillness in the pew, and that both of those things mattered less than his own comfort with how it all appeared to the men beside him. After that, I began carrying the bag anyway, without asking, and leaving it visible on the buggy floor where anyone could see it, and I never again waited for permission to be summoned. I did not announce this as defiance. I simply stopped negotiating it. What it cost me arrived slowly, and then all at once, the way most costs in that life do. Samuel stopped asking about my week. The deacon's wife stopped inviting me to quiltings, and then so did most of the others, one by one, the way water leaves a low place gradually, until one morning you notice the ground has been dry for a long time. My own mother, when I finally told her some years later why my marriage had gone the shape it had, told me a wife's obedience was not up for her opinion, and that conversation closed a door between us that never fully reopened. I do not tell you any of this to make myself into the hero of it. I got things wrong on the way out. I stayed longer than I now believe I should have, partly out of fear, and partly, I will admit to you honestly, out of love that had not yet finished dying. I said things to my own daughters in those years that I would take back if I could, hard things, frightened things, spoken by a woman who did not yet know there was a name for what was happening to her. If you have ever carried something the way I carried that bag, visibly, quietly, without asking permission anymore, tell me about it in the comments below. I want to know if you had your own version of that moment, the person or the thing you simply stopped negotiating. Years later, long after I had left the settlement, a counselor I began seeing in town asked me to describe, in detail, an ordinary week of my first marriage. And I did. The reins and the bag and the 6 words and the 11 minutes. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said there was a word for what I was describing. A word that had nothing to do with cruelty in the way we usually picture it. No raised hand, no raised voice. She called it coercive control. The slow, patient narrowing of a person's world through 100 small permissions that are granted or withheld, until the person being narrowed no longer notices the walls closing, because she has stopped testing where they are. I sat in that office and felt something in my chest come loose that had been tight since 1994. I had a word, finally, for the buggy, for the bag, for Verna's quilting frame that was never put back up. I did not understand then what I understand now. I only understood, sitting in that room, that I had not imagined it, any of it, and that there is a particular relief, almost violent in how it feels, in learning that the thing which nearly broke you has a name other people know too. I think of Verna sometimes still, and I do not know what became of her frame, or whether she ever picked up a needle again after her children were grown. And I have chosen, in telling you this story, to leave that unanswered, because I never got the ending to it myself, and I promised you honesty over neatness. What I can tell you is what I did with my own hands once I understood what had been done to them. I still carry a bag, though it is a different one now, canvas instead of leather, and nothing rides beneath any seat that I have not chosen to put there. If this story is reaching you tonight, wherever you are, I would ask you one more time to subscribe, to let this channel find its way to somebody else who is sitting in a buggy of their own, waiting to be told what she is allowed to carry. What I carried out of that community, I carry here, so that what happened in the dark does not stay there.